All right. Hello, everyone. Hello, Paul. Adam here. We have a special treat for our listeners tonight. It's a special episode of Dispersing the Fog. As anybody, our regular listeners would know, and many people that know Paul Palango will know that he has a new book coming out, and it's called Anatomy of a Cover-Up. And we're going to have some fun with this. We're going to go through some clips from the book a little later on, and we're going to talk about some of what's expected, what people can expect when they read it. I guess I'm going to say there's going to be some news generated from this book, Paul, and looking forward to
Yay.
hearing
Something's
people.
going well again here. There is going to be some news.
Yeah,
And the funny thing is, the, a lot of people have that I've dealt with this dealt with this story, um, are not going to be surprised by this story. They're going to be happy probably about it, but they're not going to be surprised.
Paul, where the book relates the anatomy of a cover-up talks about the Mass Casualty Commission and the approach that the RCMP, the Mass Casualty Commission, and other sort of institutional analysts of the uh, Nova Scotia mass shootings took to those shootings and I guess, the surrounding circumstances. And so that's what the cover-up is. This is now 2025, and it was April of 2020 when this took place. Did you think, Paul, 5 years later that you'd still be thinking about this and writing about it?
No, I mean, I didn't even start out wanting to do anything. I started out trying to help other reporters who told me, go away, old man. We know what we're doing. And I ended up writing a book before the Mass Casualty Commission even sat because I wanted to put everything on the record and force them to deal with things that they obviously were not going to deal with. Because you remember the first book, 22 Murders, part of the subtitle is The Cover Up and Obstacles to Justice. I already predicted there'd be a cover up from what I could see. And then after the Mass Casualty Commission issued its final report, I was sitting there watching and waiting and watching them do a cover up in real time. It just took a long time to unravel it all.
I remember that time well, Paul. I mean, it was a significant time for us watching it for all Nova Scotians, really, because it really captured the attention the situation did. But there's a couple of things when we look back, like before the Mass Casualty Commission, there was an original plan to do like a sort of a review of it. It wasn't going to be much of an in-depth examination at all. And that was something originally that the federal and provincial governments agreed to do on a very limited basis. And I don't know, like I think your book and some of your reporting probably led to public pressure that created that Mass Casualty Commission in the first place.
Oh, I think so. I mean, what the review was going to be was three commissioners sitting in a hotel room going over the documents and maybe giving the RCMP a slap on the wrist here or there. And it was obvious there was more going on here than the official story eventually laid out. I mean, the official story was set in stone back in 2020. In the simplest terms, a madman abused his common law wife, murders 22 people. There's a courageous battle between him and a female Mountie who was eventually murdered by him, and a finale where a couple of Mounties stumbled onto the killer, recognized him, and killed him. That was the story they've maintained, but the basic elements are somewhat true. 22 people died. There was a strange relationship between the gunman and his girlfriend. A female Mountie was killed, and the gunman was shot by the Mounties. But, as we've said before, the devil is in the details. And what we've done now is going through well over probably a million words in the report, the final report of the Mass Casualty Commission, and 2 million words and pictures and graphs in the accompanying documents. And what comes out of this is I could say uncategorically, it was a highly orchestrated and coordinated effort involving the federal and provincial governments, the Department of Justice and the RCMP to tell a story in such a way that the RCMP was left with at least a semblance of dignity. That's the story they told.
Paul, they put so much effort, the resources that went into this, the millions of dollars, months of hearings, expert testimony from across the globe on different subjects that were supposedly relevant to the commission's work. Like the amount of effort, the like, can you imagine how there would be such a massive cover up, I guess, such a large effort to make this cover up happen?
Yeah, I mean, when you say cover up, and I had this, I was attacked by former Mounties and others early on when I said cover up, and they said, "Oh well, Benjamin Franklin's old line when he was writing for the Masonic Lodge, three can keep a secret if two are dead. There can be no such thing as a massive cover up," which is basically gaslighting, because there's always been massive, complex conspiracies. Cover ups, large cover ups work. We know about them. History is filled with them. In this case, we still don't know what happened in Nova Scotia, but the story I'm going to show you is, for the most part, the story they told is very much a fabrication. Now that's hard to, it's hard to absorb. Like, how can that be? It was all done in plain sight. But it's very clever what they did and very cynical, telling a story that fit the narrative they wanted to tell and eliminating all the evidence to the contrary, which was really about the truer story.
They they did that it happened in several different ways. One of the ways I thought, because I was watching the commission proceedings every day and covering it on YouTube, doing little explanation videos 10 minutes long from a lawyer's perspective of like, why are they doing this and all. And my biggest observation was that they seemed to be trying to make it as boring as possible. Like, instead of having the officers that rushed onto the scene in the first hours, such as they did, testifying and talking about their perspective, first person perspective, they would have some lawyer just sort of reading a text, and it's like, well, what why? And it seemed like it was designed almost to lower interest in it.
Yeah, I mean, that was obviously their strategy. And what I've done in the book is not only written about the facts, but put that context you're talking about into it. For example, in one fantastic piece of evidence that showed the RCMP was lying, the Mass Casualty Commission made the evidence public, but this is how they did it. On day two, they brought in a witness and did exactly what you said: dull, boring, illogical. What that witness said didn't make sense, and nobody understood what it was really about. But something like 57 days later, a senior Mountie, was brought in who substantiated what that witness said. And it was all sort of swept under the rug because no journalist, no one made the connection. But that's how far they went. And why did they do that? Why did they even offer this evidence? Because it was on the record. They had to interview people, and if they didn't in some way make it public, put it in their records, even if they didn't, they left it in the records but didn't address it in the hearing, people would step forward and say, "But I wasn't interviewed. What happened to my evidence?" So they offer the evidence, but they hide it in plain sight, and they mixed it all up so people wouldn't understand it. And what I did, why it's taken so long, it took me and you and the citizen investigators who helped me um, to unravel it and uncover new evidence that was largely hidden in the files. As I said, there was millions of words. It was not easy to search. but we found some explosive pieces of evidence that prove our case, not the RCMP's.
Well, it's great. I think people are really going to like this. Now, we have some clips from the audiobook. So you've not you wrote the book, Paul. Sorry, a question about that. So, like, when did you start writing the book, or has this just been an ongoing process since you stopped the last one?
No, I started writing it in late 2023, but we're still researching it. We're still going through, the final report from the Mass Casualty Commission was in March 30th, 2023. And it took me a while to digest all of what was in it and to understand, I knew what I was looking for, but a lot of things I didn't know what I was looking for. I was just going to analyze everything. And as you'll see in the story, in the clips we're going to provide now, I'm giving you a sense of what the book is like and how I covered it and some of the approaches I took. It took me more than 55 hours of recording time to record the audio version of the book. Tonight, you might get 31 minutes of here, there, and everywhere.
Yeah.
But to get a sense, but I think I'm going to give the listeners a good cross section of the story as well as an explosive piece of evidence near the end.
Well, I know what you mean because I've listened to the clips. I have not yet read the book. I haven't had the pleasure yet, but I'm obviously going to. Yeah, those just you mentioned, Paul, the volume and the size of the report and the appendix, everything. Part of the volume of evidence can in a way be a way of covering things up. It's like flooding the zone, right? There's so much information that it's easy to miss one little piece. But anyway, that's why people dig through it like you do with a reporter's background and an eye for those kind of details.
Well, I've covered and been involved in many public inquiries over the years. As I've said before, I have an advantage. I'm old, my memory works, and I'm not afraid. Nobody can hire me, nobody can fire me. I'm truly independent. The other thing I should point out, getting back to as you're listening to this book, the thing you should appreciate is the approach I've taken is the axiom of well, the negative proof of the story. And what I mean by that is, and you'd understand this, Adam, um, they made it impossible to prove anything because so much was hidden. There were so many lies, distractions, and distortions. And in the negative proof axiom, if it's almost impossible to prove something, proving the prove that the opposite is not true. So if the opposite is not true, what they're saying, inductive reasoning suggested that there's an unknown truth which can be inferred from that. And what we're looking at is what they said was not true, and I'm going to show you that. That means there's another truth out there. And we're going to lay that out for you.
Well, that's true. I like it, and yeah, that's hey, in my world, the burden's always on the crown, so that's the way I view it here too. So, all right, Paul, let's cue the first one up, and then
So,
we'll
and what
listen
we're
to
going to
this.
do is we've got 11 little clips from you from the book. I'm going to sit here with try to be as calm and collected as possible. I could read it to you, but I've got a professional version. Why not do that?
Yeah, if it
And
took you 10 or 8 or 10 takes to get this right, we might as well use them.
yeah, that's right. So here it is. Here's the first clip. It's coming up in a few seconds.
Anatomy of a Cover-Up: The Truth About the RCMP and the Nova Scotia Massacres by Paul Palango. Read for you by the author. Dedicated to True Blue, a heroic whistleblower who single-handedly punctured the official narrative. The more than 3,200 current and former members of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police who have blown the whistle on some of the force's long-standing unethical and illegal behavior and practices. in memory of Leon Jodrey, who never wavered about his version of events, and Rick Howe, a radio talk show host who made a difference. Preface. There are
Okay,
25 truths.
We're gonna hold on there before we move on.
Yeah.
I just thought in dedicating that, I had to make clear that I really think Leon Jodrey was a hero in this story. He committed suicide after going through hell. Rick Howe passed away. He was instrumental in getting this story going on talk radio, and I heartfelt mean it when I dedicate this to all those Mounties, many mostly females, many males, who've been victimized by being in the force. And finally, number one to True Blue, the whistleblower who handed us a lot of the story. Are you there?
Yeah. No, that's good. True Blue, I know that was a name that we heard a lot on the podcast, Paul, and that was someone that, anyway, at some point, it's like the old Nixon deep throat, right? At some point, the name may come out, but it's important to the story.
And True Blue came about because I was able to work on talk radio and podcasts and essentially say what I was looking for, conducting an investigation basically in public, because the media were so bad, so lazy, and so unmotivated, and they believed I was a conspiracy theorist. I could get away with whatever. I could ask for the world, and they would never follow up on it. I could tell them what I'm doing, and they would never follow up on it. And True Blue responded to one of my appeals.
And so many people out there had pieces of the story that they wanted to tell, and nobody asked them.
Nobody asked them, and so I had the advantage of using a microphone literally on radio and podcasts to interview all kinds of people and spark them and motivate them to tell the story.
Yeah.
The next segment is about 3 minutes and 50 seconds long. It's the opening, the preface, the opening to the book that sets the tone for the book.
Preface. There are 25 truths about the Nova Scotia Massacres. 22 of those truths have names and indisputable fact on their side. They are the people who were shot dead by Nova Scotia denturist Gabriel Wortman. On Saturday night, April 18th, 2020, 13 of them died in Portapique, some while the Royal Canadian Mounted Police were on scene trying to figure out what to do. We still don't know the order in which they died or the precise details of many of the murders. We just know their names: Greg Blair, Jamie Blair, Lisa McCulley, Corey Ellison, Frank Galenchin, Don Madsen Galenchin, John Zoll, Elizabeth Joanne Joe Thomas, Peter Bond, Joy Bond, Aaron Tuck, Jolene Oliver, and Emily Tuck. The next morning, as the Mounties were still trying to make sense of the situation, in distinctly different circumstances, 9 more people were murdered. Sean McLeod, Alana Jenkins, Tom Bagley, Lillian Campbell Hislop, Heather O'Brien, Kristen Beaton, Heidi Stevenson, Joey Weber, and Gina Goulet. The 23rd truth is that while only 3 people, including Wortman's common-law wife, Lisa Banfield, suffered non-life-threatening injuries, hundreds, if not thousands, were emotionally or psychologically damaged by what happened. The 24th truth is that although a handful of Mounties did indeed put their lives on the line, in exceptionally trying circumstances, a few who offered to do so were not allowed to. Other Mounties, meanwhile, were anything but brave. In a profession where the preservation of life is the first priority, the Mounties saved no one who was in danger by the time they got there. It was anything but a great moment in policing. Not one Mountie's actions would make a hero's highlight reel. The 25th truth is that the RCMP and its enablers in government and the justice system have not been entirely honest about what happened before, during, and after the massacres. From its first comments, the RCMP attributed the actions of gunman Gabriel Wortman to the fallout from a long-standing domestic violence environment exacerbated by paranoia over the COVID pandemic and the lockdown in Nova Scotia. This official narrative was immediately picked up by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the federal and provincial governments. During the summer of 2020, the governments reluctantly called a joint federal-provincial public inquiry, the Mass Casualty Commission, MCC, headed by 3 commissioners, former Nova Scotia Chief Justice J. Michael MacDonald, former Fredericton Police Chief Leanne J. Fitch, and Toronto lawyer Dr. Tim Stanton. The families of the victims and the public in general hoped that the commission would get to the truth of the matter, whatever it might be. What's the big secret?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in there, Paul. A couple of things that stood out to me. Yeah, what's the big secret? Because initially there was this narrative, domestic violence situation, and he was, maybe gone a little squirrely because of the pandemic. Well, lots of people had mental health challenges, so that kind of made a little bit of sense. Okay. But then one of the other things that came out fairly early was this allegation that officers wanted to go in and do something and then were held back by superior officers. And that kind of emerged over time too, that you're like, well, geez, did anybody really put themselves on the line trying to do something to stop this? That really wasn't clear. That really went against people's expectations, I think, of what the police force does in a community generally, and the RCMP specifically.
That's right. I mean, and the whole notion of the big secret, that was the last line in my first book, 22 Murders, which sort of suggested there'd be a second book because I'd have to answer that question. And thank God Random House said, yeah, Paul, you're going to answer that question. And I think I've done as good a job I can in the circumstances answering that question, as you'll see.
Well, that's good. You don't want to be that TV show that has a big cliffhanger and then doesn't get picked up for the second season.
Well, when I finished 22 Murders, I don't know what the end is here. I'm just putting all this stuff out there to force them to produce papers. Yeah. Because I knew that if they're forced to produce papers, as I said earlier, they wouldn't show them all to the public, but they would be in the record. And, I'm experienced at going through records.
No, that's great. And introducing the commissioners too. The commissioners, when that was first announced, the former chief justice of the province and the former chief of police. And anyway, it seemed like, they certainly had the resumes for the job, but
yeah, it seemed.
But that's part of the problem, right? Then that credibility can be used as a means of a cover-up.
Well, but anyone could see, and it was argued. I argued it, and others argued that all 3 of them were conflicted from the beginning. Yeah. The commissioner MacDonald, his nephew was one of the people who were shot. His brother was running the business that towed away some of the cars. It's just Fitch was working for the RCMP Management Advisory Board at the time she was hired.
Yeah. And
her father was a Mountie.
Yeah.
And she's in a policing family, and she's married to a police officer.
Dr. Stanton had written about the trauma-informed approach to things, and so was very keenly and unduly interested in having that kind of an approach succeed in this case, which I think was a disastrous idea to try to do.
You're very pressing, because the next clip will look at exactly that. The next clip is about 3 minutes and 11 seconds. Please bear with me. Don't make fun of our faces as we stand here. We sit here staring into the camera. Here it comes.
Lawyer Josh Bryson, who represented the Bond family, was in private practice, but moonlighted as a federal prosecutor. He immediately recognized the practical problem of taking the trauma-informed approach. As a federal prosecutor, I have put 7-year-old children on the witness stand to be cross-examined by the defense, Bryson told me. As soon as you announce everything is going to be trauma-informed, everyone would suddenly be too stressed to testify. That's precisely what happened. Although the public face of the RCMP was that it welcomed an inquiry, the Mounties were reluctant participants pretending to cooperate. The public perception of police officers is that they all have a duty to testify and tell the truth, the fundamental requirements of their job, but the Mounties appeared to be running for cover. Before the first Mountie was even called as a witness, an issue was raised about whether the Mounties would be required to swear an oath. If the story of the massacres was what the force said it was, a domestic violence case gone wrong, nothing would need to be hidden from the public. But the Mounties were clearly jittery about something and were attempting to hide behind mental health concerns about not just one or two Mounties, but all who were involved. Union President Sergeant Brian Sauvé made that case in an affidavit submitted to the commission, arguing that the RCMP members had already told their stories to other RCMP members and to commission investigators. It was all in their individual notes and statements. Nothing more was needed from them, the union argued. The union's lawyer, Nasha Nijawan, argued that all RCMP members who responded that weekend should be shielded from hard questions because of their everlasting traumatization. She even offered to provide an expert witness, a clinical psychologist from the RCMP's home turf in Regina, to make the case. The commission declined. One of the lawyers who addressed the issue was Stephen Topshee, who represented the families of 4 of the murder victims. He spoke specifically about Acting Corporal Stuart Basselt, the first Mountie to arrive on the scene that Saturday night. But his argument could have been applied to every Mountie. There are a lot of facts to be known from his evidence, Topshee said. There's a lot of evidence, questions that will never be answered. It's not to put him on the stand to cross-examine him per se, in my view. It's to get to the truth and get to the facts. It's not a blame-seeking situation here. It's an inquisitorial fact-seeking situation, and it's necessary to have him on the stand in that regard. Lawyer Josh Bryson.
That's it, sorry.
Yeah, so Josh Bryson, Paul, there was different teams of lawyers, and I was watching that throughout the commission as well. The Patterson Law, which had the multiple lawyers there, and they had many of the family members as clients. Josh Bryson was kind of there on his own, but I thought he really punched above his weight, and that was one of the examples. And I thought he did a really good job in representing the Bond family and in pressing the commission on different issues. The RCMP union, boy, did they ever do a disservice to their members, and just, I thought it was shameful the way they tried to protect, and they just looked so bad doing it. Like all of these officers, and I know Stuart Basselt, he used to be stationed in our area, have testified about many more difficult things, and just that's what they do all the time, to suggest that they shouldn't be, that they should be protected from being cross-examined was just so outlandish that it was like comically bad of them to suggest that.
You're dead right. I mean, one of the things I do in the book is that I show time and time again how the RCMP union basically acted as a stalking horse for their employer, promoting crazy ideas and essentially creating false situations, which they sold to the media, and the media gobbled it up. And not a lot of the things they did and said were not true, in my opinion. And I think the facts bear that out. As you'll see, I think people are going to be stunned when they see how badly the RCMP, the National Police Federation, performed,
There's
and the disservice they did to the Mounties.
just one more thing on that, Paul. Like, people don't maybe not understand how rare it is to have a proposed expert witness not be qualified as an expert. Like, this happens in court often, where you try to suggest an expert witness on a certain topic, and you go through the steps of having them qualified, and it all, I don't know what the percentage would be, but it'd be very high. So for such a public situation as this in the Mass Casualty Commission, you think they've got all kinds of time to prepare. For them to throw up that expert witness, some, I think is a professor or an instructor from out west, it was so embarrassing, and it was such a really
Oh,
bad
it
start
was
to them.
embarrassing to call him as a witness. He was an RCMP psychologist.
Well,
You know,
but he hadn't done any scientific study of it. He hadn't done anything that you would expect from an expert.
and remember, the RCMP initially, when Wortman, shortly after the killings, they said he was an injustice collector, based on another sort of phony report that was discredited during the hearings.
Yeah.
The next clips, I'm running two clips back to back. And what they're addressing is that the Mass Casualty Commission, when it set out about its business, put a ban on publication on the names of 16 people who were close to Wortman or close to the scene, that they said would be too traumatized to talk in public about it, and they should be protected. Many of them complained to me. And one of the two of the witnesses that I focused on are names no one heard of. But when you see in the fuller story in the book, you'll see their fuller story, and it's pretty interesting. But I wanted to bring you back to the scene that night and listen to two people who were right there. They lived across the street, just down the road from Gabriel Wortman on Portapique Beach Road. And the thing is, if you listen closely to what they're saying, it's what they saw, and didn't see that's important. And one of the things that they prove is that the RCMP said from the beginning, we went in and evacuated people. So the first call, 911 calls, went in at 10 o'clock. Listen to what they're talking about and the times they're talking about it happening.
A key to unlocking the whole truth begins with those who were deemed by the authorities to have seen or heard nothing of real importance. They are the people whose testimonies were reduced to paper and distilled into dry, voiceless accounts within the mounds of commission documents. Their stories will propel this one forward, beginning with that fateful Saturday night, when it was not only what these witnesses saw, but also what they didn't see. That sometimes mattered most. 21 months before the massacres, Gerald and Floria Murphy had bought the modest house at 121 Portapique Beach Road for $126,000. Originally from Curling, a residential neighborhood in Corner Brook, Newfoundland, the couple had spent their working years in bustling Kitchener, Ontario, and thought the quiet neighborhood of Portapique was an attractive place to retire. It was remote and peaceful. The population was perhaps 100 people in the winter, swelling to a high of 250 at the height of the summer. The house sat on 1.2 acres of land and had a view of the mouth of the Portapique River. Across and up the road was the old Portapique Cemetery, which used the old spelling for the community, on the other side of which was Wortman's log cabin. At the rear of the Murphy's house and a few lots to the south was Wortman's warehouse at 136 Orchard Beach Drive. Gerald, who went by Jerry, was an affable fellow who got along with everyone in a "how you doing" neighborly fashion. When Sharon and I, who had never met them, showed up unannounced at their door late one Sunday afternoon in 2022, the Murphys were happy to see us. Jerry had been reading my stories and had heard me on the radio, and had put out the word with those who knew me that he'd like to meet me. They poured us drinks and set places for us at the table for dinner. It reminded me of the old saw about the hospitality of Newfoundlanders, with a sign on their front lawn that read, "Beware, trespassers will be fed and boarded."
That's part one of Jerry and Florrie Murphy.
Right. Names many people would not be familiar with, even if they followed this.
No, but they were right there, and this is how close they were to the action.
On the night the massacres began, Jerry and Florrie were at home when they first heard the shots. "I was in on the bed," Jerry described, "probably with the iPad or reading a book or something, and I hear pop, 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 pop." He left the bedroom and asked Florrie, "Did you hear that?" "Yes, it sounds like gunshots," she said. The Murphys didn't investigate because, according to Jerry, there was nothing happening that would indicate there was anything going on. Everything was as black as a witch's tit. There was no way Jerry could know that the pop, pop, pops were the sound of his neighbors being murdered on Orchard Beach Drive, the road behind his house to the east. As he said, it was dark and quiet between the pop pops, just another night in rural Nova Scotia. Then Florrie went to the fridge and noticed flames on the other side of the tree line. She also noticed the time on the microwave clock, 11:14 p.m. "Jerry," she said, "somebody got a bonfire. There's a bonfire over on the other road behind us." Jerry took a look and recognized that it was much bigger than that. "That's not a bonfire. That's something on fire."
So that's the first part of the Murphy story. There's more in the book, of course.
Yeah, so he's seeing sounds like when the warehouse was getting burned. So, isn't that right, Paul?
Well, it'll be the Glenchen house, just to the northeast of him, and the warehouse just to the south.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Like I noticed like early, I don't know how many days it was. It was many days, like maybe 20 or 30 before we heard from anybody in Portapique during the commission. It was always the lawyers or the police or somebody else, some experts. And it took forever before we heard from anybody that was actually in Portapique. It seemed like, the stories from on the scene, on the ground, just, they weren't being told.
Well, the Murphys, it's interesting that one of the early stories was the Griffin family, who are notorious because their son, Peter Allen Griffin, was related to the Hells Angels, a drug trafficker, friend of Wortman's. Again, never brought into the public eye, sort of disappears. One of the early stories was the Griffin family calling for help because someone was knocking on their door.
Yeah.
And the RCMP allowed that story to sort of burrow beneath the surface with the impression it was Wortman coming to their door to kill them.
Yes.
Excuse me. It wasn't. It was Jerry and Florrie. So in the middle of all this, with the police supposedly there, Jerry and Florrie go out and see all this havoc, and I describe this in the book, and they go down to the Griffin house because they like the Griffins, they got along with them. They were the ones knocking on the door. And then they come up the road, and then there's Mounties hiding in the ditch, and they see the yellow stripes of the pants, and the armed Mounties come out. And what do the Mounties do? Ask for directions to the Griffin house. And they were driving around this community. The Mounties are all hiding. This elderly couple is driving around the community, and there's no one there to protect them. If it was as bad as the Mounties said it was, why were they allowing them to stay there and to drive around?
Well, it was members of the community that were driving around, and
Yeah.
the RCMP left their vehicle out at the main road and were ran like 10 kilometers. One of them counted on
Oh,
the
so they
Apple
say.
Watch. Yeah.
So they say. I'm
Yeah.
I'm a little skeptical of that.
Interesting that they were looking for the Griffins.
Yeah.
House.
Meanwhile, there were four kids trapped in the basement on Orchard Beach Drive across from Wortman's warehouse. Their parents all killed,
Yeah.
and they were there for almost 3 hours.
And looking for the notorious criminal.
Yeah,
Yeah, instead.
it's unbelievable. The
Interesting.
next clip has to do with one of the most important sort of segments of the book, and it really relates to one of the things I alluded to earlier. The stories that the RCMP told 57 days apart to the MCC, where the MCC called evidence. It all relates to this very same thing as well. And it's how Wortman got away. Wortman, the official story is Wortman drove down to the Cobequid court, went east, and then went north on what is called the Blueberry Field Road, a road nobody knew about. This is a story that relates directly to the death of Corey Ellison. And what happens in this story, I'm trying to phrase this properly. After his death, odd as it may seem, Leon Jodrey provided a clue to what really happened. A little eerie, but the story involves a fellow named Dean Dillman. Dean Dillman, who said he was at Brown Loop between 10:38 and 10:40 p.m. This is important. Note those times.
Yes.
Time and time again in the book, I'll show how the RCMP built false but enduring narratives before all the evidence was in. So they'd make up a story, say this is what it is, it would go public, then people who were there would say, wait a sec, I was there. And they'd come forward not to dispute what the RCMP said, but not to get dragged into the investigation. That they were the good guys. And they just wanted to make sure I was there, and I want you to know. This happens time and time again. So the RCMP speculates about what happens or shapes a narrative. And the narrative of Wortman going through the blueberry field is an enduring one. People remember that.
Yeah.
But Dean Dillman punctured that narrative. And he was totally ignored by the MCC. And much of what he said, there was a slight redaction in the notes that they took from him. And it took me a while to uncover that. This next clip tells you what I did, and we can talk about what it means afterwards. Okay?
Yeah. Key part of the story.
It's definitely a key and controversial part because the implications are enormous. This is 2 minutes and 34 seconds.
And that was it. He was gone. The 23rd victim, or the 24th.
And I'm talking about Jodrey. This begins with Jodrey's suicide.
Yeah.
So I'll play this back to you. I should have set this up better. But so Jodrey committed suicide, and I've written about him, but I write about how he comes back to get the Mounties.
And that was it. He was gone. The 23rd victim, or the 24th, if you count the pregnant Kristen Beaton as two people. Jodrey's death made me more determined to wrestle this beast of a story to the ground. Like many people, Jodrey had a misperception about how the world works. He had faith that the country's institutions were committed to finding the truth. Faith is believing in something in the absence of facts. By the time he chose to end his life, Jodrey had lost that faith. His character had been brutally assassinated. He was left isolated and shunned. He ended up on antidepressants. It's been fucked up from the beginning, a frustrated Jodrey told me once. Nothing has gone the way it should go. It's not normal. I couldn't agree more. On February 22nd, 2024, exactly 2 years after the commission held its first day of hearings, I set out to find the name behind the 533 number in Dillman's records. I was hoping against hope that Dillman would cooperate and that I could track down who he had called to see if they remembered the conversation. Autumn Doucette agreed to ask her son about it. The next day, he sent her the contact information from his phone, which she relayed to me. The 533 number was in Dillman's phone under Jodrey's name, and I realized it was Jodrey's work number. He had 2 phones. Even if the RCMP ignored the 10:38 p.m. call, the phone logs proved that Dillman was at Brown Loop by 10:42 p.m., still earlier than 10:45. The RCMP said Wortman had shot Corey Ellison at 10:40:12 and may have lingered there for a few more seconds. Short of a rocket car, there was no way he could have made it to Brown Loop before Dillman. Leon Jodrey had come back from the grave to exact his revenge.
So you understand what that says?
Yeah, it's incredible. When when I first heard the clip, Paul, by the way, 533 is the exchange up here in Guysborough. So that was I was like, oh, is that a Guysborough number? No, Leon Jodrey. Incredible. So did Dillman say why he called or anything like?
How the story goes, the RCMP originally said Wortman killed all these people and left by the blueberry field by 10:45. As I explain in the book, Dean Dillman heard this when they announced it. I believe it was at the couple of weeks after the massacres. He heard it and said, "Oh, I was there." So he went into the RCMP shack they had set up on Brown Loop in Portapique and said, "Hey, you guys, you said he left by 10:45. Well, I was there. I didn't see it, but my car was there, and I want to make sure that you weren't looking for me, that I somehow got in the way." He was trying to be helpful.
Yeah.
But he didn't quite remember all his times. What he had his story was, I called my mother, Autumn Doucette, at 10:38 as I was going down Brown Loop.
Yeah.
So if you're going down Brown Loop, it's straight down. The top of the blueberry field is straight ahead. Anyone coming up there, he would have seen.
You're going to see them. It's not a big loop.
But it's 10:38. That's the important thing.
Yeah.
He said, I got there, I got out of the car, I was looking at the fires. He works for the Department of Lands and Forests. He got his azimuth out. He was trying to decide where things were. And he said, then I called Leon Jodrey because I thought his house might be on fire because he worked with Leon Jodrey.
Yeah.
And there was no answer. Leon Jodrey always said, I went home at 9 o'clock and I fell asleep. I'd been up all day working and all that.
Yeah.
Dillman, when the RCMP never questioned him about that, and they discount his story. The MCC discounts his story, and they say Wortman, oh no, Wortman killed Corey Ellison and then drove out the blueberry field, and they have all these witnesses. I show all the counter evidence, and there must be a dozen steps to show that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Wortman did not leave by the blueberry field. But he clearly drove right past the officers at Portapique Beach Road and Highway 2.
I mean, that's the only other way out.
Huh?
That's the only other way
Good
out.
way out. But the confounding thing here now, and the dynamite thing now is, the RCMP came up with this story before they knew Dean Dillman was there and before they knew what time Corey Ellison died. That comes from his camera showing 10:40:12.
That's right. There's an exact time on that one.
Yeah, and if Dillman was at the top of the blueberry field, which is at least a 5-6 minute drive away, he was there before Corey Ellison was killed.
Yes.
And even if he was there at 10:42, as the records prove, there's no way Wortman could have made it there. But it raises another question that I address in the book. Did Wortman kill Corey Ellison? Am I wrong in saying at the beginning of this book, Wortman killed 22 people? Because the more I look at it, I am suspicious about what happened to Corey Ellison. His brother Clinton has always argued, and Clinton is not sort of entirely on side. He's had some issues, but he has argued from the beginning, I think the Mounties killed my brother accidentally, and he's apologized to the Mounties for that. But others who have followed the story think much that way. And the last point on this, Adam, is that a couple of weeks ago, well after the book was written and it was all published, it was being in the publishing stage, I had a call from people who've been sort of conversing with me over the years, and I never really knew who they were. I have hundreds of people who I deal with. And this person contacted me. We said hi, da, da, da. Then they contacted me somewhat later and said, the reason I want to call you is that my cousin was a Mountie at Portapique that night. My other cousin and I firmly believe that he shot Corey Ellison.
So Paul, here's what I like. There's evidence that points to that. I think one of the officers anyway, there was some suggestion of one officer that was, had stress leave afterwards. Somebody was seen, I guess, sitting against a tree, deep in thought or potentially remorse. I don't know. I think that if the RCMP had come out, so if this is indeed what happened, I think if the RCMP had come out early on and said we think one of our members shot a citizen, thinking that it was Wortman, and here's how it all went down, the public might have forgiven that. There he was. He was a hard person to see. You wouldn't have known, because the two Ellison boys were going up in the dark. Could have easily been mistaken, but they didn't. They didn't say that.
Well, there's another piece of sort of evidence that appeared then disappeared that suggests that's the case. In the first press conference the RCMP held, Assistant Commissioner Chris Leather said the RCMP would be making 3 references to SiRT, the Serious Incident Response Team, the police watchdog, about incidents involving the RCMP firing their weapons. One was the killing of Wortman. One was the debacle at the Oslo Belmont Fire Hall, where 2 officers shot up the fire hall. And the third one was an exchange of gunfire last night. Then that one disappeared.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they were talking about.
Yeah.
And because the exchange of gunfire, the third reference, completely disappeared from RCMP statements after that. And I suspect they were talking about the accidental shooting of Corey Ellison. So they constructed a story to make it go away.
So, Paul, in your book, you outline in, I guess, more detail than we've just heard there, that theory, the theory and the thinking and the evidence behind all of that.
Oh, it's quite detailed.
Yeah.
Because I go into all the things that happened, including how the RCMP and the MCC went along with it. They, on a map of the scene, they moved the body of Corey Ellison to the east side of Orchard Beach Drive, which fits the narrative of Wortman driving that way. But the body was on the west side of Orchard Beach Drive, and that's where it was located originally. And there are eyewitnesses from the next day who put it there as well. And that's where the family put their memorial, on that side of the road.
Well, that seems meaningful. Well, Paul, there's another big one that I know we're going to talk about, but you may have, I think you know this, but your book is listed by Indigo Canada as one of the most anticipated Canadian books coming up. So this may be one of the reasons why that is the case, is insights and revelations like we're talking about.
There's
Anyway,
more.
that may move up the list, although it was pretty high already when I looked. All right, well, let's.
Okay, well, I think we should move along here. One of the things, another little clip I'm going to show you is involves why reporters miss the real and hidden stories. They're hooked on official sources. They tend to be inexperienced, and frankly, them and their editors are lazy. They want easy stories, digestible stories. They don't want to dig. Here's a little 2-minute excerpt explaining what happened at Glenholm on the Sunday morning.
The foundational paper on Glenholm was already in the media's hands, which made what Burl did that morning redundant. He began reading from the document, a mind-numbing experience highlighted with the occasional still photo or brief video. The events in Glenholm boil down to this. A Mountie corporal drove past Wortman on Highway 4, but lost him when he tried to pursue him. A couple said he was at their property. The RCMP assembled its troops, but got to the property just after Wortman escaped. They missed him by just that much. It took Burl a mere 50 minutes to blast through the details, and not one person connected to the scene was called upon to speak publicly. When the story about Wortman driving along Highway 4 in Glenholm was reported in the days, months, and years after the massacres, it was clear to me that many of the journalists had never been to the area. I've always been a Hieronymus Bosch kind of journalist, not the artist, but Michael Connelly's fictional detective whose motto is, get off your ass and knock on doors. If more reporters covering this story had done that, they might have been able to provide context and challenge the RCMP's flawed version of events. Individually and together, Chad Jones, Ryan Potter, and I visited all the key crime scenes numerous times, some as many as a dozen. I took measurements, took photos, talked to people. I tried to match the RCMP and witness stories with what all the witnesses said and with the geography. Here's what I learned and what Burl's reading of the Commission's foundational paper left out.
Of course, you're going to have to read the book to the rest of that story.
Well,
It's a long, involved story, and it's sadly comical.
Well, it is. Like I remember that incident, and the couple that had to hide in their home, we never heard from them. Like, they were interviewed, but unbelievably that they weren't put up on the stand to talk about what happened and how they felt and all those things. It was just, yeah, Roger Burrell, who was probably the main lawyer for the commission throughout, as far as presenting, the foundational documents, senior legal aid lawyer at the time. But probably the dullest way to present all of that evidence was just having him read that out. But it raises another thing though, Paul, and I think the commission would have been aware of this. And you did the difficult thing, which is, okay, so the first version of a story is like the first draft of a contract. Well, then once that is in place, everybody is reacting to that first draft or the first version of the narrative. And it's very difficult to just start from scratch again and reconstruct something or anything that's competing, because everybody already has the first version in mind. So so that's what the media did. They picked up that first version and just went with it without really questioning it, and certainly without constructing anything from scratch.
And no matter how much you try to prod them and say, hey, hello, pay attention, they're like, go away, go away. You're just making our life difficult. we want to move on. We got a flower show to cover tomorrow. We're ready to move on. It was disgusting.
Yeah, it's just filling time and then in between the ads, like, okay, we've got a story. We don't need anything more.
That's right.
Yeah.
Next clip. This is how the RCMP, and we're going sort of in the chronology of the story here.
Yeah.
So how the RCMP, the Department of Justice, and the Mass Casualty Commission were foiled in their attempt to hide one of the most embarrassing and terrible mistakes made by the RCMP. So they had a plan, essentially a conspiracy to not make public this horrible thing, and how they were foiled. It's 3 minutes and 58 seconds, but I think it's riveting and interesting.
I agree. Yeah.
The Mounties were just getting in position to storm the Fishers' residence. They were mobilizing to deal with the false report of a shooting a kilometer up the road at the hidden Hilltop campground. The Campbell Hislop murder scene farther up Highway 4 in Wentworth was still fresh. Now there were reports of 2 shootings on Plains Road. The Mounties found themselves going in every which direction. When the Mounties finally got to O'Brien, they found a pulse and called for an air ambulance for her, which they soon canceled. They deemed the area to be unsafe and would not allow paramedics or anyone else in. When one of O'Brien's daughters, Michaela, tried to enter the scene, a Mountie told her to fuck off. The Mounties placed a blanket over O'Brien and declared her dead. The O'Brien family knew otherwise. Soon after the incident, they went into Heather's computer and found the data from her Fitbit, a wristwatch device that tracked her heartbeat in real time and stored the information on her home computer. It showed her heart beating for 8 hours after she was shot. The family captured the image from that day. The Fitbit information was raised by the family at an emotional meeting with the RCMP on May 28, 2020, almost 6 weeks after O'Brien's murder. Its existence was first recorded that day in the handwritten notes of Constable Skipper Bent, the RCMP's designated family liaison officer. Present at that meeting were Heather's husband, Andrew Teddy O'Brien, and his 4 daughters, Kathleen Devine, Darcy Dobson, Molly O'Brien, and Michaela O'Brien. The RCMP was represented by case manager Corporal Angela McKay and Constable Bent. The O'Briens had many questions, which the Mounties seemed unable or unwilling to answer. Teddy O'Brien accused them of hiding Banfield in protective custody. No one has even seen her, he said. The others were screaming, Lisa must have known that she should be charged, knew about the car, knew what he was doing, Bent wrote in his notes. Numerous times they said they were unable to heal until they get answers, want details, will get a lawyer if needed to get answers. Like many others who had been interviewed, Teddy O'Brien accused the Mounties of using their skills to avoid getting to the bottom of the story. As Constable Bent noted about the atmosphere in the room, they told us they had questions, but every time they asked a question, they would interrupt, say we were going around in circles, not telling the truth, that we were trained that way. Andrew told me I would be a good politician because I danced around. Andrew told me we don't have hearts. For the O'Briens, the big issue was the Fitbit information. Over the next 19 months, as the opening date for the commission loomed, the family waited for follow-up from the Mounties or the commission. There was none. They sent the commission a New Year's gift on January 1st, 2022, the Fitbit printout. And yet Burrell didn't address it in his presentation. Like his summary of Kristen Beaton's murder, His description of events surrounding Heather O'Brien's death was slim. The Mounties were just getting in.
Yeah, that was a startling piece of information when it came out. It seemed, the description that came out later. This was a part of the trauma-informed approach too, was that Heather O'Brien was shot in the head and was, maybe have died instantly. But that wasn't revealed until much, much later. And the commission, the RCMP had this Fitbit information, and I had a Fitbit. I mean, it doesn't record if it's not on your wrist. So it was begging for an explanation, and they weren't confronting it. I remember during the commission hearings, Paul, that it was after the commissioners laid out that section, that foundational document, that the O'Brien family put out on Facebook a long post about the Fitbit. And that was the first time anybody had heard about it, because the commission had mentioned it. Nobody had talked about it publicly through the RCMP or anybody. How could they think they were just going to ignore that?
Well, I think the contrast I constantly make in the book is that Commissioners McDonald and Fitch, Stanton didn't say very much, were constantly saying, we want this to be transparent. We want the truth. We're getting to the bottom of this. They kept emphasizing over and over again. It was really a case of they protested too much.
Yeah.
They keep talking about the transparency, and everything they do was opaque.
Yeah, that's absolutely. By the way, the talk about healing, part of what the commission didn't do was allow people to heal, and part of how people heal is to talk about what happened, and it helps to process the trauma in many ways. And the commission didn't really give people that opportunity, so it was I thought a failure in that respect as well.
Another now we're at one of the most sensational, if not the most sensational story in the book. And I'll give you sort of a part of it, but the key part, because you should know how it came about. And I explain how it came about. I call it it's the origins of a fairy tale created by the RCMP. Immediately after the mass casualties, about 4 or 5 days after, so around April 23rd, 2020, RCMP Union President Brian Sobe said in a newspaper interview that Constable Heidi Stevenson rammed Wortman, that she saved many lives and she was a hero for doing this. A few days later, it was clear that that didn't happen. Anyone who's been to the scene could see that didn't happen. Stevenson couldn't see where Wortman was coming from. Then the force actually said that's not true in one of their public press releases, but they came up with a better idea. They said Stevenson was in a shootout. At the time, even people I talked to then and since said they didn't really believe that happened. But the RCMP went ahead with the story. The Mass Casualty Commission, citizens groups, and RCMP veterans got behind the story. And it's clear the RCMP needed a heroine in spite of the witnesses and the facts. And here's my report on what happened to Stevenson based on the evidence, the available evidence that was in the MCC files. This is going to be a little longer. It's 5 minutes and 9 seconds, but it describes the evidence that was left out of the MCC by the RCMP and the commissioners. I describe what I found and how I found it. And at the time, Pat Curran, former chief judge of the Nova Scotia Provincial and Family Court, was sitting in for Felix Cacchione as director of SiRT, the police watchdog. Here we go.
As I was drafting this chapter, I stopped to search the Commission's website for a certain document, and once again found myself sidetracked as I surfed through a bunch more files. At one point, I typed Stevenson in the search engine. Up came 77 documents, of which 55 were sequentially numbered photographs of a charred and rusted pair of handcuffs found in a pile of rubble near a makeshift memorial at Stevenson's murder scene by Eric and Rosalie Fisher 2 days after the incident. Only one of the photographs showed what appeared to be the same handcuffs lying flat in their entirety. All the rest were close-ups of various parts of the handcuffs, which essentially showed nothing. Recall that Lisa Banfield said that she'd escaped from handcuffs in Portapique. The Mounties couldn't find them in Portapique, but now seemed eager to prove that these were the set used on Banfield. They learned that the handcuffs were manufactured by the Peerless Handcuff Company in West Springfield, Massachusetts, but there was nothing the lab could do to link them to Wortman. The Mounties continued to assume they were the ones used on Banfield, and that became the default truth. I wondered why so much space in the Stevenson documents was being given to the handcuffs. It triggered my spidey sense. Was the commission trying to distract people from something else on the list? It was an old trick, many times seen. Then I noticed something intriguing, a document named COMM0018258, headlined Response to Stevenson Referral. Inside was a letter dated April 22nd, 2020, from Pat Curran. It was a reply to Leather's referral to SiRT, submitted the day before. It read in part, "It is inconceivable and utterly incompatible with the mandate that SiRT would investigate the apparent murder of a police officer unless there was reason to believe the death was caused by the actions of another officer. In this case, not only was there an apparent murder, but as you said to me by telephone on Sunday afternoon, the officer was executed by the suspect who later died at Enfield. SiRT most definitely does not and will not investigate executions of police officers by civilians. Although you mentioned the officer's death to me that day, you made no request that SiRT take part in, let alone take on, the investigation of it. I did not know who was conducting that investigation, but I believed it was either the RCMP, HRP, or both. It was not until receipt of your formal referral mid-afternoon on Tuesday, April 21st, well over 2 days after Constable Stevenson's death, that SiRT was asked to investigate Constable Stevenson's death. If SiRT had concluded this was otherwise an appropriate referral to accept, it would have been pointless to do so. Nearly all the significant investigative decisions had been made and acted upon already. SiRT does not accept the referral. Those who have started and carried out the investigation to this point should complete it or find some other police agency to do so. Pat Curran, Interim Director." When I discovered this document, I had been working this story for almost 4 years. Although I had always suspected that the Mounties were being duplicitous, finding proof wasn't all that easy. But here was COMM0018258, hidden in plain sight. One document in a mountain of them. Transparency, as the commission would call it, and it raised real questions about what the RCMP was trying to accomplish. Note Curran's outraged tone, which alone made it a highly unusual institution-to-institution missive. One can almost hear him calling the Mounties bluff, that there had been a shootout and that the disingenuous way to prove it was by suggesting that Stevenson had inadvertently killed Joey Weber before she was shot, although there was not a stitch of evidence to suggest that happened. Curran reminded Leather that he had said 2 days earlier that Stevenson had been executed. That description fit the evidence.
There you are.
That's pretty stark language from Judge Curran there, Paul. Like that is like as you say, like inconceivable. Like that's yeah, pretty strong language.
Well, there's more to it. I devote 2 chapters to this. This is part of 1 chapter. And there's other evidence to show that overwhelming evidence that this is a made up story, a fairy tale. Including in one of them, one of the chapters, I think the title of the chapter is "Not Enough Holes in the RCMP Story." For the shootout to have happened, there were 27 witnesses, none who saw a shootout. No one was hit by a bullet. No windows were broken. Nobody ducked a bullet. None of this happened. And nobody heard that many shots except for 2 people who had connections to the RCMP through, sort of vicarious connections to the RCMP. And where they lived, they heard multiple more shots, but it clearly was echoes. The gun that Wortman was using was a loud gun. And even then, they reduced the number of shots that they heard in subsequent interviews.
Yeah, I mean, that in itself is interesting. And they would go to people who would, give confident answers that supported their narrative. We'll come back to that if you want, but the other part of that you mentioned about the handcuffs and, Lisa Banfield escaping the handcuffs, escaping the car, all these things. None of those were ever tested in any physical way to see if they could have been true. Like, get the same kind of handcuffs, see if anybody can get out of them, squeeze out of that hole through
I don't
the.
know. The big question about Lisa Banfield is that the evidence came out at the MCC, and in the evidence it says she had the handcuffs on one wrist. Why did she have to squeeze out of it?
Wouldn't have to. No.
No, she
No,
didn't.
that's right. There's so many things about that
Story.
didn't make sense. Yeah.
Doesn't make story. But like many of the stories, the Stevenson story was floated before all the witnesses reported in. Again, once the witnesses did report, and one of them was a witness who followed Wortman to the scene where he crashed into Stevenson's cruiser, turned his engine off, and sat there and watched what happened. He did not see Stevenson get out of the car, which raises other questions about there were 14 shell casings, 12 outside the car, 2 inside the car.
Yeah.
The third car that were found days later. How did they get there? Who put them there? The shell casings inside the car are the most problematic because if she fired 2 shots in the car, where are the holes? The forensics show no holes.
Covered up by the. You wouldn't think a fire would cover up holes in a windshield or wherever they were shot.
No. It's just a totally. I'm convinced it's a totally concocted story, and I think there should be an investigation into that, the Ellison killing, and prove me wrong.
Well, they started obviously, Paul, with the headline Heidi Stevenson is a hero, and then everything flowed from that. And they couldn't compromise on that.
And they're saying like, who's going to take this story on because she's a female, she's a hero. Well, I lay out the entire situation in the book over 2 full chapters, and you're going to see why the RCMP didn't really want to address this.
Yeah.
We're going to get moving here. The next clip, I'm looking. I spend a lot of time. I spent maybe 4 chapters on Lisa Banfield. But one of the things that really caught my eye was something that was totally ignored by the MCC and the media, was the money she was spending and where she was spending it. She made $15,000 a year, but according to her tax records, but she was spending in the last 19 months $5,500 a month on credit cards alone, average. But what struck me going through her financial records was a series of small purchases she made in the days before the massacres. And that's what this clip is about.
Yeah.
It's not very long, 2 minutes, 50 seconds.
While Wortman and Banfield were supposedly shacked up in Portapique, riding out the lockdown, they were doing more than playing COVID games, as Wortman put it to his neighbor Dana Geddes. In the days leading up to the massacres, Banfield spent $555.96 at Walmart, according to documents released by the MCC, which were not reported by the media. She also made a series of unexplained purchases at 3 different Staples Canada outlets. Although it was the early days of the COVID lockdown, Staples stores were open because they were considered an essential service. On April 15th, Banfield purchased something for $60.94 in Dartmouth, and then appeared to return it that same day to the Bedford store. She then made another purchase in Bedford for $74.79. 2 days later, on April 17th, she made 5 separate purchases at the Staples in Truro, 3 of them for $50.92, one for $49.98, and the final one for $38.19. I couldn't find any record of her ever making any other purchases at Staples. Maybe it was all innocent and Banfield was stocking up on gifts. It seemed unlikely that she was buying office supplies or doing a massive amount of photocopying, since Wortman was retiring. Maybe they were stocking up on Folger's coffee to ride out the lockdown. But to me, the amounts were indicative of a service she was buying. Assuming that every sale attracted Nova Scotia's 15% harmonized sales tax, the base prices of the purchases were $52.99, $65.03, $44.28, $43.46, and $33.21. Those would be extremely odd retail sale prices, ruling out something like US SIM cards for their phones. In my day job as a glass artist, the only time I've encountered such numbers is for shipping services, which Staples provides for businesses. What might Banfield have been shipping the day before the massacres? PPE masks to distant friends? Motorcycle parts to Wortman's customers? Personal valuables? Money? And to whom would she have shipped it? It was yet another detail the MCC never explored in depth.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really interesting. Like, not a regular shopper. I've been to Staples to send things out. Interesting, you mentioned the Truro store, that she had separate purchases on the same day.
Yeah.
Well, if you needed a bunch of supplies, you would make one purchase. So that's unusual too. Yeah. I noticed your subtle dig at the HST there too, Paul. Like that 15%.
I did it all.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've always been fascinated by that, going over those kinds of financial records and purchase records. And in a previous lifetime, I did fraud investigations, so it's sort of up my alley. I sort of learned how to interpret patterns and behavior and conduct and stuff like that. Going through people's financial records, you get to see a pattern, you get a picture of them and what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's really interesting. Like shipping, imagine that she's shipping either cash or valuable things to some trusted person or some location where they're going to pick it up at a later time. Anyway, yes.
The second to last clip, everyone knew that Wortman had a friend on the Halifax police force. His name was Barry Warnell. He was interviewed shortly after the massacres, like a few days afterwards. And even then, he knew details about Wortman that were not known until months or years later, like Wortman having $770,000 in cash and what his likely plan was. Yet Warnell was never re-interviewed that we know of, and was never called before the MCC to explain stuff. And this is a particularly interesting clip because it gets into, it suggests, just listen to what Wornell is saying. It suggests he knows a lot more about Wortman than people realize.
Back to Constable Barry Wornell's interview. After learning about Wortman's money, Wornell suspected that his friend had a desperate grand plan, which he sketched out for the Mounties in June 2020. He suggested that Wortman's fulminations about the imminent collapse of the banking system may well have been an act. From his experience, Wortman just wasn't the kind of person who would devolve into a survivalist, holed up at his cottage, armed to the teeth and chowing down on rice and beans for the rest of his life. Others thought much the same. When Wortman told his neighbor Dana Geddes that he would shoot a deer if he needed to survive, Geddes chuckled. "You could do that, but they're not going to taste very good at this time of the year." Wornell thought the survivalist story was a screen. He believed Wortman was hectically liquidating anything and everything because he was getting ready to make a run for it. He was in a hurry to unload the Portland Street office. He was gathering all his money that wasn't hidden in a safe place, either in an account that couldn't be traced to him or offshore. Whatever was going on, Wortman didn't have time to list and sell his properties. He had enjoyed success in the past with burning buildings down. Wornell intimated that Wortman likely planned to burn his cottage, warehouse, and vehicles for the insurance money. Everything, it seemed, except for Banfield's Mercedes, which was parked in the garage on Portland Street, and a decommissioned police car also in that lot. Why? In a recording, Wornell recounted to the Mounties the conversation he'd had with Sergeant Chambers Spriggs about Wortman's money. "Who do you think he's going to get the money to?" Wornell said, asking a rhetorical question of himself. "I'm going to tell you something, Tanya. He gave the money to nobody. His plan is to get out of here. He's," inaudible, "in this country, and that money's got to get him out of here. So I tell you, he don't plan on giving that money to nobody, and I don't think he ever planned on dying either." In the context of the conversation, there are only a few candidates for the inaudible word: dead or fucked or their synonyms. Wornell didn't buy into the RCMP story that Wortman had pre-planned his rampage. He thought Wortman was trying to do something more sophisticated: fake his own death. In his view, the replica police car was not intended as a subterfuge to sneak up on people and murder them, but as a tool for escaping the chaos and going into hiding. He surmised that Wortman planned to pull a Wolf Carroll. "Ah, Dave Carroll," Wornell told the Mounties. "Wolf Carroll." Constable Wilcock interjected. "He's been gone 30 years now. Actually, about 20. The Hell's Angel. Some bikers think he's hid in witness protection. They don't believe he's missing. On the run, right?" The wily Wornell had planted an awful sandwich in the neat little picnic basket of those who seemed to be trying to cover up what really happened. Both Wornell and Sergeant Chambers Spriggs were excluded from the Spinquiry's witness list because they might take the commission into places where it didn't have the heart or government permission to go. A source later showed me a copy of a mass email sent on August 17, 2020 by Halifax Regional Police Superintendent Andrew Matthews to all Halifax police officers who might have involvement in the massacres investigation. Matthews ordered them not to provide their notes to the RCMP for the inquiry, which might also explain why Wornell wasn't questioned further or called to testify. Wornell seemed to think that Wortman knew he was a dead man walking in Canada. The only possible reason is that he had crossed the wrong people.
So
I like that. I like that one.
I like that a lot, Paul. This makes so this really I guess it kind of crystallizes in some ways what I really think took place here and what seems to make sense as a theory. So, by the way, Dave Carroll, not the singer, the what is it? United Breaks Guitars singer, also named Dave Carroll. So Wortman had also fireproof bags of cash, I think,
Yeah.
under his house. So, all right, preparing for a fire. Then he's he's dead, gone, but not dead. He leaves in the RCMP car, disappears. Who's left? Lisa Banfield, the who could have collected the insurance, because somebody has to collect the insurance. And then there it is. They ride off in the sunset together. I guess he would have to trust her to that extent. Some extent, who knows? But insurance fraud, get the money, get out of there. And maybe he had to get out of there because he was in trouble.
And that's what I've been saying for 4 years. And that's what my people, 5 years. And I've been called a conspiracy theorist. And I didn't even know about Warnell's statement until I wrote the book. I mean, I had to find it.
Yeah. And again, of course, the commission doesn't call as a witness.
No, because they didn't want to deal with anything criminal or anything. The commission refused to lay serious criminal charge, or the police refused to lay serious criminal charges against anyone. Minor charges against Banfield that disappeared and her brothers. And because they didn't want to open up their books and have an investigation to what was really going on.
Yeah.
And was Wortman a confidential informant? There's a bunch more in the book that basically makes that case.
All right.
And the last clip is about Frank Magazine, who we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for Andrew Douglas at Frank Magazine. He was the only journalist who carried the story, who recognized its importance. He took a lot of heat for trying to do the right thing, which is nothing new. Shoot the messenger is as old as the Bible.
Yeah.
And, um, George Orwell, wrote, "The further society drifts from the truth, the more it will hate those who speak it." And Andrew was, he gets a lot of hate, but he speaks the truth. And we couldn't have done this story without him. And I want to have one little clip here showing what he did. It's 2 minutes and 27 seconds.
At Frank, Andrew Douglas was perplexed by the state of journalism in the country. He had worked at the magazine for 17 years, the last 12 as its editor. Throughout his career, he was an outsider in the world of journalism who reveled in needling and lampooning reporters, talking heads, and their editors. Frank's business model was based on satire, with the occasional scoop. Now it seemed the world of journalism had become a dystopian nightmare. Just about every story being published was based on official sources or had a political agenda. Not one mainstream or alternative news outlet seemed interested in holding the powerful accountable. Douglas had a crazy idea. He would bypass Frank's tight-fisted owner and put some of the little money his enterprise had where his mouth was. He thought he could force the commission to release all of the Irving Big Stop security tapes so that the true story could be told once and for all. On April 25th, 2022, Frank's lawyer, the well-regarded David Hutt, filed a submission with the commission that argued it was important for all the tapes to be released because they may suggest a slightly different version of events from the one set out in the Big Stop foundational document and evidently adopted by the Commission Council. Over the next several weeks, other legacy media outlets joined in the application. The CBC, CTV, the Canadian Press, and Global. Eventually, the arguments by all those lawyers seemed to wear down the commission. After more than a month of fighting to have the tapes released, a date was finally set, Monday, June 13th, 2022. Douglas was confident that we had won a worthy journalistic victory. Let's see what we get on Monday. I don't know, I said. I've seen this before. What devious trick are they going to pull out of their bag to distract everyone? We both laughed.
That's it for today. And what devious trick did they pull out of their hat, Adam?
Oh man, I remember that. I was looking forward to hearing what they were going to try to say in defense of that. They released the tapes. I mean,
Oh, they released the tapes, and immediately after,
yeah,
Brenda Lucky, the commissioner of the RCMP, was accused of interfering in the investigation,
yeah.
and all the media ran off chasing that story. And I
Just-
remember being interviewed
yes,
in a number of places saying, "This is all bull. This is all meant to cover up what's these tapes has on these tapes, showing the Mounties executing Wortman." The story, it wasn't what the MCC said. It wasn't what the RCMP said. It was an execution.
yeah.
And I lay that out in detail in the book and show how it worked and all the things that point to that.
Yeah, it seemed like they knew he was there and they were just going to go kill him. And that was, there were lots of things pointing in that direction. And you're right, they distract with this other big, oh, Brenda Lucky and interfering, blah blah blah. Yeah, but they didn't actually go through uh, with the application because I was on pins and needles, kind of wondering what is the RCMP, what are they going to say to try to defend not releasing these? Like it didn't seem like there was any chance of it, them making a compelling argument.
So, the thing is, getting back to something you said earlier, once the narrative is established, it's hard to knock down.
Yeah.
And even today, you have people who accept all this narrative. Heidi Stevens, who was in a gunfight, Wortman, a couple of brilliant Mounties recognized Wortman, engaged him, and killed him legitimately. Corey Ellison, Wortman killed all 22 people. Saying anything contrary to that is basically a sacrilege. And I think this is an issue of accountability. That is this going to change the narrative for everyone? No. Are people going to be mad? Yeah, probably, because you're not supposed to take on the Mounties, not in Canada. But we have a deferential media and people who have a sense, the deference of Canadians is well known. Deference to authority. And I'm just hoping to make it Canadians a little more honest and a little more aware of
Well,
how the world works.
Paul, I think one of the things, the criticisms I've had of the commission is that they did it in such a boring way. They didn't really draw the public in. And when they made these, what a lot of people would consider bold recommendations at the end, the public didn't go along with them because they hadn't built that credibility up throughout the process to, have people just accept whatever the recommendations were going to be. So hopefully more people will read your book than read the final report, and that will be the actual and I guess long-lasting narrative.
Well, I warned the commission, you may recall, I warned the commission back in 2020 when they're appointed. If they don't do a proper job, that will be their legacy. And this book makes it their legacy, I think.
I agree. Well, I think we went a little longer than we normally do for our regular episodes, Paul, but I think it was well worth it. I mean, to hear those clips, I think people are going to be really interested in the story again. And I think this will hopefully generate a little more of a renewed momentum to see the RCMP replaced throughout the country, to see more questions raised about their structure, their performance, their sort of, I don't know, their guiding principles. And
Well, we got a country where there's no accountability. For for any institution right now. There's stories appearing almost every day on every aspect of it, from leading, George Stroumboulopoulos talking about it, Andrew Coyne and others, all talking about the same thing, the lack of accountability and virtually everything that happens in the country. And I hope that this is a step forward to, sort of creating some sort of sense of accountability, getting politicians off their butts, getting people engaged, and getting people to recognize that just because the government and the police are telling you a story, it doesn't mean it's necessarily true. So I said at the beginning of this thing 5 years ago, when I see the police and the government saying they don't want to upset people, they're going to make things trauma informed, right away the hairs on my neck go up, because I think the government and the police aren't there to be nice to you. And when they say they're going to be trauma informed, that tells me they're going to be hiding things. And it turned out that's what they did.
Well, it generated a new book for you, at least, Paul, and I think people are going to enjoy it. So it's great. So in that respect, at least. But yeah, it's going to generate a lot of interest, I think, and people are going to see you being interviewed in different media, I guess, over the next little while. But I think this is a good opportunity for them to hear it in a long
And I
format.
think in future shows, I'd like to go back into some of these issues, some of these events and issues alone in more detail, if people are up for that.
Yeah.
Because, once you read the book, I think there's even room for plenty of conversation between our audience and us, and we'll have to set something up to do that.
Well, I'm going to read the book, and so they'll get it through me, and they should read it themselves so that they follow along with the thrust of our conversation. So yeah, thanks thanks
you.
everybody for watching this tonight, and check it out online and at all fine retailers.
Yeah, it's officially out on Tuesday, June 10th.
Very exciting. All right, well, that's it for tonight, folks, and follow us here every Sunday night with new episodes of Dispersing the Fog, and we'll be talking about these stories and following up on these in more detail in future shows, and hope you join us then.
Thank you. Night night.
Good night.